This is Power and Politics. I'm Karina Roman in Ottawa. Prime Minister Mark Carney rings up U.S. President Donald Trump, and Trump takes this call. The two leaders spoke today for the first time since the August 1st trade deadline. The details of that coming up this hour. Plus, the same week Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre reclaims a seat in Parliament, new polling suggests he has mixed reviews among voters. The Power panel is here with their take on what it says about his political future. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's ready to negotiate the end of war in Gaza, just as he orders the invasion of Gaza City and the building of more settlements in the West Bank. The latest on those developments just ahead. Power and Politics starts right now. We begin with new details in a high-profile alleged terrorism case involving the Canadian Armed Forces. Last month, the RCMP charged 4 Quebec men, all with military ties. They were accused of plotting to seize land near Quebec City. CBC's Catherine Tunney is on this story and joins me now. So, Kat, you saw the court documents in this case. What do they show?
Yeah, well, we're getting a much deeper look at the case that the RCMP was building before they kind of moved in on these 4 men late last year, and sees what's been described as one of the biggest kind of tranche of weapons related to a terrorism case in Canadian history. So these documents, they're kind of the application the RCMP used to execute a search warrant, and they were unsealed today. And they show that it was actually the Canadian Security Intelligence Service that tipped off the RCMP about a concerning Instagram account. It was called Hide and Stalk. So, CSIS hands that over, and the RCMP picked that up. And they investigated, kind of zoned in on one of the accused, Marc-Ariel Chabot, a 24-year-old military member. And in these documents, they allege that he was kind of the de facto leader. And they accuse him of wanting to create kind of a community, outside of the government, and defend it by force if needed. So, according to these documents, police allege that Chabot went on a podcast where he talked about his political views, talked about this community that he allegedly wanted to build up, and that he was willing to defend it, and that he was training people to defend it. And at one point, he spoke about, quote, another Waco. So clearly a reference to the 1993 deadly standoff in Texas, where we saw, a religious group kind of stand off against the U.S. feds, and it obviously ended up in gunfire and flames, and actually many children died, as well as people on both sides. So a bit of a concerning quote there. And throughout these documents, police are raising concerns that the men involved and this kind of hide and stalk group in general are accelerationists, which is a term that CSIS uses, and we've seen other people who watch this space use to describe a movement of people who want to see the end of society, the fall of society happen more quickly, so they can kind of build it up in the way that they would like to see it. And in some of these cases, when we talk about accelerationists, they're often armed to the teeth when they plan to do this.
And just quickly, it sounds like police had eyes on these suspects for a significant amount of time.
Yeah, so it shows that they had aerial footage of the accused, GPS tracking. They were looking at their packages, their bank accounts. So they were under pretty intense surveillance for going back to 2023. We know the police were filming these military exercises that they're alleged to have been forming, and they know that the techniques that they were teaching people are very much the same kind of format that you're taught in the Canadian Armed Forces. So again, they had pretty intense eyes on these people. And just to underscore that these documents that we saw today date back to January of last year. So it's kind of a snapshot of where the case was at that point. Now, they didn't arrest them until last month. So clearly there's a whole other window that we'll be waiting to see if and once the trial goes ahead. And again, just to underscore that this is the police's, the RCMP's take, and the allegations have not been tested in court, and clearly we'll be waiting to hear from the accused as that court case continues.
Thank you very much, Kat. Great work. Now to the Middle East, where Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will restart negotiations to end the war in Gaza, but he's also moving ahead with a military takeover of Gaza City, the last refuge for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Many Palestinians are fleeing Gaza City in anticipation of the invasion. Israel's military already controls the outskirts, and Netanyahu is expected to give final approval for the full operation any day now. Israel has also approved an expansion of settlement in the occupied West Bank. It would essentially split the Palestinian territory and make a two-state solution unviable. Canada has joined dozens of other countries in condemning both of Israel's decisions this week. Joining me now, Rhonda Sleem, is a non-resident senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins University. John Allen was Canada's ambassador to Israel and is now a senior fellow at the Bill Graham Centre for Contemporary International History. Welcome to you both. Rhonda, Israel is beginning its military operation to take over Gaza City, while in the same breath saying it will begin immediate negotiations to end the war in Gaza. What do you make of the timing of both of these actions by the Israeli government?
I think it is Mr. Netanyahu trying to please different audiences domestically, but also in the international community. On one hand, he has his right-wing coalition, which is supported by a good majority of the Israeli society that wants to, complete the ethnic cleansing campaign of Palestinians and force 2 million Palestinians out of their home in Gaza. And on the other hand, you have the families of the hostages. We think there are about 20 Israeli hostages still alive. There are about 30 dead bodies that are still controlled by Hamas. So he wants to please also the families of the hostages, the international community that doesn't want this attack to proceed by saying, oh, we have the negotiation started. But he knows fully well that once this attack, this campaign starts, it's going to be very hard to, for the negotiation to succeed. The ceasefire proposal, the deal has been on the table for some time. And every time there are different reasons for Mr. Netanyahu to back away from it, partly for his own political survival.
John, Hamas has already agreed to the latest ceasefire proposal. We've just been waiting on word from Israel. What do you think is holding Israel back? Are they waiting for something in particular, or is it just that they're not interested in ceasing fire?
I think they're not interested in a ceasefire at this point. In fact, the deal that's on the table is one that was in place and resulted in 30 hostages being released before it was unilaterally breached by Netanyahu. Just months ago, he was interested in a partial deal, and Hamas reputedly wasn't at the time. And now that it's back on the table, Netanyahu is refusing it. And the fact that he's going ahead with this Gaza plan, one that has been opposed by his own chief of staff, which his former Minister of Defense and former chief of staff have said there are no more achievable military objectives in Gaza to be had, is just, as my colleague said, an effort to keep his two messianic right-wing ministers in the coalition and keep him in power as long as possible.
Rhonda, Israel just approved a settlement project in the occupied West Bank that would effectively cut that territory in two. How will that complicate negotiations for a two-state solution?
I mean, the Israeli finance minister said it. It removes the Palestinian state from the table. I think we can, declare that the two-state solution is now officially off the table. So the international community can recognize a Palestinian state, as some countries have done recently, including Canada, although Canada has put some conditions on its recognition of a Palestinian state. But in fact, there are fait accompli on the ground that are being created, like these settlements, like the 750,000 armed settlers that have the full support of the Israeli government, and that intend on basically, removing that option from the table, but also taking over all these lands in the occupied West Bank, and that's in violation of international law. And so it behooves the international community. I understand. I mean, it's very good to pay, lip service to recognize Palestinian rights, but we have to start really thinking seriously about what we're going to do about these thousands, hundreds of thousands of, armed Jewish settlers who are going to make this, who basically are intent on erasing Palestinians.
John, this is a project that's been under consideration for over 2 decades. So what does it tell you that Israel is moving on this now?
Well, up until now, the Americans have basically prevented Israel from going ahead with it. Ironically, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave an interview on TV yesterday in which he called Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister and the minister behind this approval of so-called E1, 30,000 new homes. Netanyahu called him a fringe minister. And yet he is the man that's been responsible for all the new illegal settlements. He's been responsible for pushing this through. And as was said, if this goes ahead, it will split the West Bank in half. It will divide and make it impossible to get from Ramallah to Bethlehem. It's already incredibly difficult for Palestinians to move around the West Bank. So this really does have to be stopped. I have supported recognition of Palestine for a variety of reasons, and some of the reasons given by Canada were specifically to prevent the threat of the end of a Palestinian state. And I think that, as was said, I think countries are now going to have to act, whether it be trade sanctions, whether it be recalling their ambassador. They're going to have to act. It's not necessarily going to affect Prime Minister Netanyahu, but they do have to send a signal that this is completely unacceptable, as is the plan to force somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million people from Gaza City into an area where there is not enough food, not enough medicine, and certainly not enough accommodation for them.
Rhonda, you mentioned lip service and that it's time to not do that anymore and to actually really come out strongly against what's going on. Canada has come out and signed a joint statement with dozens of other countries condemning this latest settlement plan, and yet international criticism, as you've noted, hasn't seemed to deter Israel so far. So do you think there is a point we could reach where Israel won't be able to ignore international pressure any longer?
I mean, definitely there are, as my colleague said, there are trade sanctions. There are, a lot of countries are still sending and selling weapons to Israel. Israeli officials are still welcome in many capitals. And so I think there are certain policies that governments can take to send a stronger signal than they have done today. The problem is that for Mr. Netanyahu, the only country that matters is the United States. And unfortunately, I don't see the Trump administration willing to engage in any kind of these sanctions. And in fact, I'm afraid that what Mr. Netanyahu is doing in Gaza with this ethnic cleansing, with forcing people out of their homes, is basically realizing and very much in sync with what Mr. Trump has declared of wanting to have a Riviera, in Gaza. And so as long as this administration in the United States is supporting the Israeli government and is not pushing the Israeli government toward making concessions, toward stopping the settlement, as my colleague said, past administration have stopped some of these settlements, not successfully most of the time, but sometimes they were able to stop that. This settlement itself that is just approved by the Israeli government has been on the books for some time, has been stopped in the past by previous administration. With this administration, it's very clear that Mr. Netanyahu got the green light to proceed with it.
John, we only have less than a minute left, but I did want to ask you really quickly whether or not you see any hope of that changing, of Donald Trump taking a different approach to the Middle East and perhaps more pressure on Israel to back off of what it's doing.
Well, the only thing that has moved Trump so far is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That forced him in a way to tell the Israelis to start opening up the gates and allowing more trucks in. That hasn't exactly worked because there's not enough food going in, but it was an effort to improve the situation. And if a million people end up in the south and there is a renewed crisis, as there will be, perhaps he may act. But that will be in respect of Gaza and not necessarily in respect of the West Bank, where his own ambassador essentially claims that what Israel is doing is legal, the settlements are legal, and he calls it Judea and Samaria, as do the Israeli settlers there. So I don't see him acting on the West Bank, but hopefully he may do something vis-a-vis Gaza.
Well, thank you both for your time, John Allen and Rhonda Sleem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is a redistricting battle spreading across the United States. Texas is leading a Republican effort to redraw the voting map to give the party an electoral edge in next year's midterms. Up next, we'll hear from a Texas Democrat who's trying to stop it. Lawmakers in Texas have approved a new electoral district map that favors the Republican Party.
88 ayes, 52 nays. House Bill 4 passes to engrossment.
The new map jeopardizes 5 Democratic-held seats while giving Republicans a leg up in next year's midterms. It is now set to go to the state Senate. This all followed a 2-week walkout by Texas Democrats who left the state to delay the vote. When those Democrats returned, Republican representatives enacted rules that lawmakers must sign permission slips in order to leave the Capitol building, and that they must be escorted by police officers when not in the building. So, how are Texas Democrats responding to this? Mihaela Plisa is a member of the Texas House of Representatives, and she joins me now. Welcome. Now, you joined fellow Democratic Representative Nicole Collier in her sit-in protest by tearing up the permission slip that was given to you. Was that more than just a symbolic move for you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Karina. Look, what Representative Collier did was the right thing. Her instincts were right. We should have never signed those permission slips to be escorted by the Department of Public Safety everywhere. We were followed to the grocery store to buy toothbrushes. If we wanted to go on a walk, they were following us on the walk. It should have never happened, and that's why I tore it up. Because I was using my constitutional given right as a member of the minority party to break quorum to prevent this unconstitutional vote.
And now you gave a little sense of what was happening in terms of security following you around, but can you describe for us a little bit more what it's been like at the Capitol building under these new rules, and painting us a picture of sort of what that resulted in for example, your colleague Collier, but what you guys have done in reaction?
Well, the Speaker of the House, in order to try to maintain quorum, literally put out civil arrest warrants for us. And so we knew that once we returned to Texas, that we were going to be taken into the halls of our representative, the House of Representatives, and they were going to lock the doors. What we didn't know is that they were going to make us sign these slips to release us into the custody of DPS. And so when that happened, Nicole refused to sign it because she knew that she hadn't committed a crime. We kind of, in the chaos of it all, signed them. And when I got home, I realized I have this DPS officer following me around. Look, it was taxpayer-sponsored surveillance, but what was even worse is that in order for these DPS officers to follow us, they had to be taken off the beat. My DPS officer was taken off of financial crimes to just follow me around and sleep in their car outside my apartment in the middle of the night. And I just thought that was, one, financially irresponsible, but also illegal, and we shouldn't have ever had to sign those forms.
Now, you've called the Republicans' redistricting map racially gerrymandered. What did you mean by that?
Well, in the United States, under the Voting Rights Act of 1965, what we've seen is that political gerrymandering, drawing these maps for political gain, is actually legal in the United States, and it's legal in Texas. But what is not legal is racial gerrymandering, picking your communities and cracking and packing them so that you're picking your voters. And what we've seen with these 5 maps that Donald Trump has asked our governor to pass, what we've seen with them is that they've used AI technology to redraw these maps and find low propensity voters and high propensity voters. These happen to be people of color, Latinos, African Americans, and they've crammed them in with high propensity Anglo voters, making it a racially gerrymandered map, illegal under the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
What do you think will happen if the Republicans are successful in their redistricting plans in Texas?
Well, I think that when our Constitution was signed, they said, what kind of government do we have? And what we heard was a republic, if you can keep it. And I think that most Americans forget that last part. We have to fight to keep this republic and keep this experiment in democracy alive. And look, we have a president that thinks that he is king. He thinks he can carve up countries like Ukraine. He thinks he can buy countries or take over countries like Canada. And he thinks that he can chop up communities like mine in Texas. and it's wrong, it's unconstitutional, and we're going to fight back. And if that means California has to draw their maps to pick up 5 seats, we're going to do it. Because now that Texas has passed this unconstitutional racial map, Donald Trump has literally put out a tweet saying he's going to try to get 100 new seats in the U.S. Congress. And so we have to fight back against that.
So you did mention the California effort that is mimicking, but from the Democrats, mimicking what the Republicans have done. You mentioned fighting. Ultimately, is this where this is headed? Is it headed to the courts?
That's why we had to come back to the House floor, because our next battle is going to be in the courts, and we feel very good about the legal framework that we laid out yesterday on the House floor. And we also feel very good because we know that this map is going to land in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And they have just ruled on 2 other unconstitutional maps, one out of Mississippi and one out of Louisiana. And we believe that Texas is also going to be struck down. But if that doesn't happen, we are ready to take the battle to the ballot box. We're already registering voters, educating them, and making sure that they know that their power is much more powerful than any politicians.
Very quickly, you have said that by walking out, although now you're back, Texas Democrats started a nationwide movement. But what specifically do you think Texas Democrats have accomplished?
Well, first, we killed the first called special session by the governor that was a sham and put Trump over Texans. That's a win. Second, we got California involved, we got New Mexico involved, New York, and so many other states involved, woken up and ready to fight back against this tyrant that we have in the White House. But also, we've educated our communities. They don't believe that they believe that it's imperative to get off the sidelines, and they are going to get involved. They're going to get organized, and we're going to fight back, and we're going to turn America back into the country that we know it is, one that believes in freedom, one that believes in democracy, and one that works for the people, not crooked cronies in D.C. that want to do power grabs.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking to you again and getting an update on how everything's going. Thank you very much, Mihaela Plisa.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
U.S. President Donald Trump's influence is certainly felt on this side of the border. How is he reshaping Canadian politics? That conversation next. This week's by-election in Alberta returned Pierre Poilievre to his role as official opposition leader. Now, anticipation is mounting ahead of his first face-off against Prime Minister Mark Carney in the House of Commons this fall. Poilievre lost his seat in a historic election that was dominated by President Donald Trump's threats to Canada. Investigative journalist Justin Ling wrote a book about that consequential election and the mandate Canadians gave a new Liberal government. It's called The 51st State Votes: Canada versus Donald Trump. Here to talk about his book is journalist Justin Ling. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So your book focuses a lot on binaries. Yeah. So whether we're talking about Canada versus the U.S. or Carney versus Poilievre, and how we can learn a lot about where we stand as a country from how things played out in the campaign here. You were a front seat observer on this election, and you've been on other elections as well. What are the most striking differences between this election and previous ones?
I mean, for starters, is that this election, I think, matters so much more than previous campaigns. I mean, listen, I'm not going to play down the importance of an election campaign. They're unbelievably important tests of our democracy. But this one was existential. You hear that word a lot. I know it sounds super rote at this point, but it's true. It was an existential test of who we are as a country, whether or not we want to continue to be a country. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but it's true. It was a test of how we want to stand on our own 2 feet, how we want to push back against our one-time ally who has become in many ways our tormentor, right? It was really a test of how we function as a country. It was also a test of how we fix things that are broken here, because I think despite the debate about whether or not the phrase Canada is broken was accurate, I think we've all come around to the idea that at least some things about this country are in need of repair, right? So it was an existential exercise more than I think any other campaign in Canadian history, and it really was a mandate to fight back, right? It was a mandate to stand up to Donald Trump, to build new alliances, to rebuild the economy, to rebuild government services, and I just can't think of any other campaign, at least going back 100 years, that was this important.
At least going back 100 years.
Yeah, a little bit further back, maybe I can think of a couple, but yeah.
Now, Mark Carney's whole campaign was about capitalizing on Donald Trump being this common enemy that people could direct their anger and their fear towards. But what were the risks, or what could have been the risks to pinning your whole campaign on that, knowing what we know about Trump and how changeable he is, and how could things have maybe worked out differently? What are the risks on that?
Well, I think the risks were not so much in the campaign, because let's be honest, Mark Carney ran the better campaign. He set the ballot question. He spoke to the anxieties that were present across the country, and he won, right? So I think we could say that he had the better campaign. But the risks are about how he now has to govern, right? And I think you're seeing this play out already. He set the expectation that he could get a deal with Donald Trump. Right? He occasionally say, oh, maybe I won't, but he often built the idea that it was on the table. He built the idea that setting up these new alliances, these new trade partnerships would be relatively easy. He set up the idea we could rebuild this trade infrastructure pretty quickly, that we could improve government services, build a bunch of homes pretty quickly. We're about to find out that a lot of that is much harder than it seems, and the high likelihood is that we're not going to get a deal with Donald Trump. If anything, the deal we already have, USMCA, could be at risk, right? We're going to have to face facts. We're going to have to make some sacrifices over the next number of years if this trade war continues, as it probably will. We're going to have to face more sacrifices if the U.S. government does go the illiberal route that Donald Trump is currently taking it. If American democracy is indeed at threat, that is an enormous risk to us. I don't think Mark Carney was 100% honest with people about the degree of that challenge. I mean, how can you be on the campaign trail? But nevertheless, I'm not sure everyone is alive to just how painful the next few years could be.
So the risk wasn't then so much as now the expectations are there. Now, Pierre Poilievre, he certainly took a different path. And there's been much talk about the path that he chose and what message he tried to stick to, and pivoting and not pivoting in time. He had to distance himself from comparisons to Donald Trump. Much has been talked about why the Conservatives chose to go the route they did. Why do you think they did?
It was always this numerical test of saying, okay, listen, we have 30-some-odd% of the electorate. They're going to stick with us no matter what. There's going to be some non-voters who maybe we can energize into coming out for us. And there's those People Party voters that we can steal off from Maxime Bernier. They did that, and it worked. I mean, to their credit, that math worked for them. it wasn't good enough because ultimately Mark Carney pulled away enough people, both from the Conservatives, the Greens, the NDP, the Bloc, everybody else, to win that to near majority, right? So the Conservative strategy played out as they anticipated, but it wasn't enough. And ultimately,
how much does personality play into that?
Well, here's the thing, is that part of that strategy, part of their effort to win over those, say, People Party voters, was to appeal to this sort of anxious populist right, the same base that Donald Trump capitalized on in the U.S. And Pierre Poilievre borrowed some of the language, some of the policies, whether it's talking about, you know, the nefarious globalists, the World Economic Forum, whether it's campaigning against, let's say, gender ideology or what have you, or even promising to dismantle the Canadian Foreign Aid Service, right? Pierre Poilievre parroted many of the same lines that Donald Trump used. Now, they're super offended at that comparison, but the reality is tons of Canadians bought it, right? Tons of Canadians looked at the two and said, there's way too many similarities here between Donald Trump and Pierre Poilievre. And ultimately that hurt them. And how would it not hurt them? And how does that not hurt them going forward? I think it is an albatross around their neck and it will be there for a while.
Now, we're still dealing with the ramifications of tariffs, still waiting for that elusive deal. But the conversation is shifting back to some extent about affordability, and the healthcare system and building homes. As you said, the expectations of all of that and focusing on our own economy are there. How long can Mark Carney rely on sort of the Trump boogeyman to be the gift that perhaps, I mean, gift is a subjective word, that Trump was during the election?
Well, let me bring it back to Pierre Poilievre, because for all the things he got wrong, he got some big things right, which is that you really can't succeed in a fight against Donald Trump if you can't be strong at home, right? If you can't unleash growth, if you can't build a ton of homes, not just from the government, but from the private sector, if you can't get your oil to market or your natural gas to market, you're in trouble, and you ultimately can't fight with one hand tied behind your back. He got that part really right. And it's now the challenge for Mark Carney to do both at the same time, because the reality is both issues play into each other. If we're dealing with an affordability crisis, if we're dealing with a productivity crisis, if we're dealing with a government services crisis, we can't actively and adequately fight that trade war. We can't adequately go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump if we're dealing with those lagging issues here at home. So they're really the same problem. And ultimately, if we want to really succeed, rebuilding our military, being a strong partner in NATO, getting peace for Ukraine, getting a ceasefire in Gaza, if we want all of those things, we do need to be strong, we do need to be effective. And ultimately, it can become a nefarious cycle, right? A negative feedback loop. If Trump does succeed in kneecapping our economy, it becomes a lot harder to solve a lot of those problems as well.
We have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Justin Ling is author of the 51st State Votes, Canada versus Donald Trump. Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke to U.S. President Donald Trump today for the first time since they failed to reach a trade deal. Coming up, the Power Panel gives their take on that conversation, and the leaders promise to speak again soon. Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump on the phone today, weeks after blowing past the August 1st deadline for a trade deal. A readout from the Prime Minister's office says the leaders discussed current trade challenges, opportunities, and shared priorities in a new economic and security relationship between Canada and the U.S. The leaders also discussed how to build on the president's leadership to support long-term peace and security for Ukraine and Europe. The readout also says Carney and Trump agreed to talk again soon. Let's bring in the power panel to talk about this. Cameron Ahmed was head of communications for former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Amanda Galbraith was an advisor to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And we're still waiting for Shachi Kurl, who's the president of the Angus Reid Institute, to get technically hooked up. We're having a few glitches, but we hope to have her online soon. Why don't I start with you, Cameron? The Prime Minister's office says Carney and Trump, quote, agreed to reconvene shortly. What's your take on this conversation?
Well, the readout you just shared with us is about the most generic a readout can be for a conversation like this, having written many of them myself. But look, the bottom line that I think we can take away from this conversation is it's good news. The fact that they're talking shows that the dialogue is happening. The fact that the foreign minister just met with her counterpart is also good news. When there's a long stretch where you don't see engagement between the governments, or you see just comments being made by proxies, comments coming on background to the press, that's where you start to worry a little bit about where the talks stand. But as we heard from the sources from the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister initiated this call. They're continuing the conversation. The dialogue needs to happen. And obviously, engagement is key. The Prime Minister has shown since the beginning of his tenure that he knows how to navigate these personal dynamics. But no matter how skilled he is or the team is, this is the most volatile situation for Canada's trading relationships in the world. And it's the most volatile it's been in a long time. So obviously, we'll have to see where this goes.
Amanda, I guess the question is, we had heard that they were sort of texting buddies almost early on, and then everything kind of seemed to go quiet for a while, and then the deadline passed. Will this call help blunt criticism of what sort of some described as of inaction by Carney on the U.S. trade file?
I mean, if this was a story of one of my friends trying to date someone, I would say he's not into you and it's not going well, is how I would have described it. I mean, I appreciate, it's good they're talking, that's right, but this is the lowest possible bar that we could put for a relationship between Canada and the U.S., and that is concerning to me. The last time they spoke publicly that I can find any record of is mid to the end of June. It is now August, we've had a trade deadline pass, and to Cameron's point, that was a very generic, candidly, uninspired conversation that took place. Maybe there's more stuff out there, but I'm not encouraged. I'm glad they're speaking to one another, but am I encouraged that he's got some magic wand to build with this relationship? No. Do I think that President Trump is a rational actor and easy to deal with? Absolutely not. I imagine it's incredibly challenging in the PMO, but regardless, Canadians are deeply anxious. There was discussions, we're going to have a deal. There may be something around the G7 meeting that went through. We've had multiple deadlines miss. Tariffs are now higher than they were when the Prime Minister came into office. And the discussion, all the noise that I'm hearing now is that Trump is going to blow up CUSMA. And that would be, I think, a wild thing for us to happen for this country. And I think that is a real political freight train running at this government.
Shachi, I think we have you now. We've obviously been talking about the phone call today between Donald Trump and Mark Carney. What are your thoughts on whether that was a long time coming and that might blunt some of the criticism that Mark Carney was facing that the call finally happened again?
Yeah, apologies. I can hear program now, but sorry if I end up saying anything that's already been said. I mean, I guess this is a proof point that they had a conversation. Yay, they're talking to each other. And there was criticism of the Prime Minister prior to this when it came out through different sources and possibly by his own word. I'm trying to remember where he said, oh, yeah, I talk to the president all the time. And people were like, what? Huh? We don't know about this. So in a way, he would have been up for some criticism if this call hadn't been disclosed. But really, we're having a conversation about the fact that they had a conversation. that does not appear to have led to anything. Now, at this stage, I would disagree with Amanda a little bit, only because the data shows us that there is still a fairly strong backing from Canadians in terms of not feeling the need to hurry up a deal, to wait for the best deal possible, and to defend the interests of Canada above and beyond rushing or panicking to get a deal, or suffering from the FOMO perhaps that the UK and the EU or Japan really took into heart and rushed their deals, only to maybe find out that maybe it wasn't all meant to be what it was. That said, what this does is it opens up a narrative on part of Pierre Poilievre to say that, hey, look, the criticism is there that we're not necessarily seeing progress. There is a level of anxiety and worry on part of Canadians around how long is this going to take, and at what point does Canadian patience run out in terms of seeing some sort of progress?
Well, you actually just gave me the perfect segue to change gears, because this week Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre cruised to victory in his Alberta by-election. But a review of his leadership coming at the party's national convention in January, could that prove to be a speed bump? Because, and Shachi will tell us all about this, new numbers from the Angus Reid Institute show that Poilievre still holds the support of Conservative voters. 68% say they support him as leader, but 54% of Canadians who considered voting Conservative but ultimately didn't end up voting Conservative want him gone. What does this mean for Poilievre as he approaches that leadership review in January? Shachi, we looked at some of the numbers there. What else stood out for you from this poll?
Well, I think it really continues, Karina, to underscore the challenge that the Conservatives have at this stage. Among their hardcore, diehard, true blue base, they're still with him. Yes, you go, you lead us into the next election, we're with you, except for that about 20%, just under 20%, who are not sure that he should be the leader rolling into the next election. And what's really interesting about that segment, and remember, when it comes to popular vote, the Conservative versus the Liberal vote is really, it is, football season's coming up. It is such a game of inches, if not centimeters, and single percentage points. And so you have to look at where those Conservative voters who don't necessarily want Poilievre, where they would take the party. And it's very interesting because there's a split. Some of that group want Poilievre gone, even though they voted Conservative this time around, because they want to see the party move even more to the right. And so that runs counter and reignites the challenge that the Conservatives have around keeping the fringe or the hard right on side, where at the same time you have a significant segment of people who switched away, who drifted away from the Conservatives in the last election, and they may be all for seeing Poilievre gone, but where does the party go? Do they try to take more of the center and risk continuing to lose that hard right flank? That was their problem before the election. It continues to be their problem now. Or do they move back to the right, try and pick up some of that group, and once again suffer potentially the alienation of the center right? So this is the challenge, this is the problem, and there's also a problem of the Poilievre rebrand, which I'll address really quickly. He still continues to have likability issues. His likability hasn't improved despite the time that he had, the face time that he had on the campaign trail. If anything, people are more likely to have a view of him that is insincere, a view of him that they would not like to see him as Prime Minister. Now, granted, a lot of those people wouldn't vote Conservative to begin with, but a lot of them would. So he's not endeared himself to the population overall.
Amanda, 68% of Conservatives, according to this poll, Conservative voters still support him. Is that enough for him leading into that leadership review in January?
I think Pierre Poilievre is going to handily win the leadership vote in January. From talking to Conservatives, there are no concerns or risks to my mind that is a challenge for him. I think what we will see post, they've taken some time. I think he's reflected on what has happened in the last election. And I think you'll see as Pierre Poilievre comes out in the fall, he's back in the House, they'll find their feet and I think kind of pivot and talk about some different issues. Certainly, like Shachi's very good at what she does, right? And she's identified, I think, some challenges that Conservatives face. But we also need to remember at the end of the day, like, electoral politics are not popularity contests. People voted for Stephen Harper 3 successive times, including a majority government. And I worked for the man, and I can tell you right now, many times people told me they didn't like him, was like, I would be rich if I had a nickel for every single time that happened. But people liked him because they thought he was competent. One of the interesting parts about Shachi's poll is he gets 73% of Canadians think he is the best person to hold the government to account, which is what the opposition leader's job is. So I actually think there's a lot of growth there for him if he can kind of balance the attack dog with more of the policy-led principle conversations we want to see and some of those softer edges we saw in the campaign. So certainly there are learnings from this, and the Conservatives should take it seriously. I do not think his leadership is at risk, and I think people forget, but he led the Conservatives to the largest electoral showing we've had since 1980. Like, that is not a small feat.
Cameron, the Conservatives were up 20 points against your former boss, Justin Trudeau, and yesterday Poilievre called Prime Minister Carney's leadership worse than Justin Trudeau on deficit spending and broken promises. Is that a message Liberals should be concerned about at all as the fallout from the U.S. tariffs start to be felt more broadly here?
I mean, of course, the Liberals have to be constantly on their toes when it comes to the opposition. You can never count out the Conservative Party, and you shouldn't count out Pierre Poilievre's ability to be a clever politician. I think to what Amanda was saying, the lessons to be learned, people were saying that before the election, that he had to show a softer side, that he had to be able to demonstrate, of course, that he can hold the government to account, that he can propose alternatives, but that he can do so without being this belligerent and petty person that he often appears to be. And from just this week, his tone has not changed. I don't think he is capable of changing and reflecting a different side of himself that this polling and many other polls have shown that a lot of people want to see, like, especially in the context of negotiating this trade deal with the United States. People, of course, are anxious right now, and people, of course, expect results from the government right now. But they also remember what it was like dealing with the president in the first time around. Getting a deal is really hard. It takes poise, it takes patience, it takes cunning, it takes respect, it takes diplomacy, and I don't think Pierre Poilievre is contributing in any meaningful way to that conversation or demonstrating that he can be a value add in this Team Canada approach. So I'm not concerned that he could win his leadership review. The question is whether he can be in this time where everybody is paying attention and everybody wants to see the country united and all of our politicians working together, whether they're proposing different solutions or whether they agree with each other or not. But at the end of the day, are they supporting the same objectives? And I don't think that he has set himself up to be that person as the opposition leader.
Okay, so we're running short on time. So 30 seconds or less for each of you, starting with you, Amanda. The Commons returns later next month. They'll be facing off for the first time, Carney and Poilievre. What will you be watching for?
I'll be watching for the show between the two of them. I think it's going to be really amazing to see. I think you'll see the Conservatives really hold the Liberal government's feet to the fire on action. Where's the list of the special projects? Are there going to be shovels in the ground? Where is an alleged deal around trade? Are tariffs going to go down? I think there's a lot of promises and expectations being set, but the Carney government has yet to deliver, and I think that's where the Conservatives are going to go.
Shachi, really short. What are you looking for?
A lot of what Amanda's already pointed out. This is the big curtain reveal. What does the Liberal government have? What are they actually prepared to move forward on? And from my perspective, how quickly does that change public mood, if at all? Because right now they are with him. Even Conservative voters are with this government. Let's see how long that lasts.
Cameron, really quick, what about you?
Same thing for me, and whether the Conservative opposition is able to contribute in a meaningful way or whether they're going to stick with the approach that works well on TV and it works well for the clips on social media, but does it over the long term demonstrate a mature approach to the Team Canada united front that we all want to see.
Thank you all for your contributions today. Thank you to the Power Panel, Cameron Ahmed, Amanda Galbraith, and Shachi Kurl.
Thank you.
I'm Karina Roman, in today for David Cochran. Thank you for watching Power on Politics. More on CBC News Network. Stay right there.